Okay, so first of all, I'm filming this off of my phone, so I have no idea how high quality this will be. Sorry. Second of all, a little intro to this in case some of y'all are science nerds like me. I usually start off teaching animal cells and then go into plant cells. So if there's stuff missing from this slideshow, that's why. So, for time purposes, I'm just going to show y'all the animal cell part of it, just because there's so much material with animal and plant cells. Usually I'll start off class by asking, some questions about what we learned the day before. So I'll ask, so I'll ask, okay, we're going to talk about the plant cell today. What did we learn about yesterday? They'll say animal cell, because hopefully we will have discussed animal cells the day before. Then we'll ask, what types of animals are animal cells found in? So, they'll say typical animals, and then I'll ask, well, what kind of cells are we made up of? And hopefully they'll say animal cells. So after they say animal cells, I'll go into, all right, well, how do we get our energy? We eat, we drink, can we get our energy from the sun? Hopefully they'll say no. And then I'll ask them, well, how do you think plants can get that energy? And how do you think all that works? And we'll kind of go into a little discussion on chloroplast before we watch this. And then I'm a big tree nerd. So, we'll probably talk a little bit about trees and how some of the cool stuff that they do. And then I'll start the slideshow, which starts off with, hopefully my computer's not too slow, a video.
So plants are freaking great because they have this magical wizard power that allows them to take carbon dioxide out of the air and convert it into wonderful, fresh, pure oxygen for us to breathe. They're also way cooler than us because, unlike us and every other animal on the planet, they don't require all kinds of Hot Pockets and fancy coffee drinks to keep them going. The only thing plants need to make themselves a delicious feast is sunlight and water. Just sunlight and water. Paula Deen can't do that. She makes fried egg, bacon, donut burgers. I'm telling you, this is surprisingly good. This is a different kind of magic. But, part of this is plants, and everything in it. In fact, everything that is in this McDonald's, in fact, everything you have ever eaten in your life is either made from plants or made from something that ate plants. So let's talk about plants. Plants probably evolved more than 500 million years ago. The earliest land plant fossils date back to more than 400 million years ago. These plants were lycophytes, which are still around today, and which reproduce through making a bunch of spores, shedding them, saying a couple of Hail Marys, and hoping for the best. Some of these lycophytes went on to evolve into scale trees, which are now extinct, but huge swampy forests of them used to cover the earth. Some people call these scale tree forests coal forests because there were so many of them, they were so dense, and they covered the whole earth that they eventually fossilized into giant seams of coal, which are very important to our lifestyles today. So this is now called the Carboniferous period. See what we did there? Because coal is made out of carbon, so they named the epoch of geological history over how face-meltingly intense and productive these forests were. I would give my left eyeball, 3 fingers on my left hand, the middle ones, so that I could hang loose, and my pinky toe, if I were able to go back and see these scale forests, because they would be freaking awesome. Anyway, angiosperms, or plants that use flowers to reproduce, didn't develop until the end of the Cretaceous period, about 65 million years ago, just as the dinosaurs were dying out. Which makes you wonder if, in fact, the first angiosperms assassinated all the dinosaurs. I'm not saying that's definitely what happened, it's a little bit suspicious. Anyway, on a cellular level, plant and animal cells are actually pretty similar. They're called eukaryotic cells, which means they have a good kernel, and that kernel is the nucleus, not nucleus. And the nucleus can be found in all sorts of cells: animal cells, plant cells, algae cells, basically all the body proteins. Eukaryotic cells are way more advanced than prokaryotic cells. We have the eukaryotic cell, we have the prokaryotic cell. Prokaryotic basically means before the kernel. pro-kernel, and then we have the eukaryotic, which means good kernel. The prokaryotes include your bacteria and your archaea, which you've probably met before in your lifetime. Every time you've had strep throat, for example, or if you've ever been in a hot spring or an oil well or something, they're everywhere. They cover the planet. They cover you. But like I said, eukaryotes have that separately enclosed nucleus. That is, that all-important nucleus that contains its DNA and is enclosed by a separate membrane. Because the eukaryotic cell is a busy place, there's chemical reactions going on in all different parts of the cell. It's important to keep those places divided up. Eukaryotic cells also have these little stuff-doing factories called organelles. We decided that we'd name everything something weird. But organelles, and they're suspended in cytoplasm, continuing with the really esoteric terminology that you're going to have to know. Cytoplasm is mostly just water, but it's some other stuff too. Well, basically, if you want to know about the structure of the eukaryotic cell, you should watch my video on animal cells, which, let's just link to it right here. Plant and animal cells are very similar environments. They control themselves in very similar ways, but obviously plants and animals are very different things. So what are the differences in a plant cell that makes it so different from an animal? Well, that's what we're going to go over now. First, plants are thought to have evolved from green algae, which evolved from some more primitive prokaryotes. And something plants inherited from their ancestors was a rigid cell wall surrounding the plasma membrane of each cell. So this cell wall of plants is mainly made out of cellulose and lignin, which are two really tough compounds. Cellulose is by far the most common and easy to find complex carbohydrate in nature, though if you were to include simple carbohydrates as well, glucose would win that one. And this is because, fascinating fact, cellulose is in fact just a chain of glucose molecules. You're welcome. If you want to jog your memory about carbohydrates and other organic molecules, you can watch this episode right here. Anyway, as it happens, you know who needs carbohydrates to live? Animals. But you know what's a real pain in the ass to digest? Cellulose. Plants weren't born yesterday. Cellulose is a far more complex structure than you'll generally find in a prokaryotic cell, and it's also one of the main things that differentiates a plant cell from an animal cell. Animals do not have this rigid cell wall. They have a flexible membrane that frees them up to move around and eat plants and stuff. However, the cell wall gives structure to a plant's leaves, roots, and stems, and also protects it to a degree. Which is why trees aren't squishy, and they don't giggle when you poke them. The combination of lignin and cellulose is what makes trees, for example, able to grow really, really freaking tall. Both of these compounds are extremely strong and resistant to deterioration. When we eat food, lignin and cellulose is what we call roughage because we can't digest it. It's still, useful for us in certain aspects of our digestive system, but it's not nutritious. Which is why, eating a stick is really unappetizing. And are you sure? This is all 100% plant shirt. It doesn't taste good. But we can't go around eating wood like a beaver or grass like a cow because our digestive systems just aren't set up for that. However, other animals that don't have access to delicious donut burgers have either developed gigantic stomachs like sloths or multiple stomachs like goats in order to make a living eating cellulose. These animals have a kind of bacteria in their stomach that actually does the digestion of the cellulose for it. It breaks the cellulose into individual glucose molecules, which can then be used for food. But other animals like humans, mostly carnivores, don't have any of that kind of bacteria, which is why it's so difficult for us to digest sticks. But there is another reason why cellulose and lignin are very, very useful to us as humans. It burns, my friends. This is basically what would happen in our stomachs. It's oxidizing, it's producing the energy that we would get out of it if we were able to, except it's doing it very, very quickly. And this is the kind of energy, this energy that's coming out of it right now, is the energy that would be useful to us if we were cows. But we're not, so instead, we just use it to keep ourselves warm on the cold winter nights. Ow, it's on me, ow. Anyway, while we animals are walking around spending our lives searching for ever more digestible plant materials, plants don't have to do any of that. They just sit there and they make their own food, and we know how they do that. They do it with photosynthesis. Another thing that plant cells have that animal cells just don't have are plastids, the organelles that plants use to make and store compounds that they need. And you want to know something super interesting about plastids? They and their fellow organelles, the mitochondria that generate energy for the cell, actually started as bacteria that were absorbed into plant cells very early in their evolution. Maybe some protist-like cell absorbed a bacteria, and it found that instead of just digesting that bacteria for the energy that it had, it could use that bacteria. That bacteria could create energy for the cell or convert light into lovely glucose compounds, which is crazy. Nobody's really precisely sure how this happened, but they know that it did happen because plastids and mitochondria have double membranes. One from the original bacteria and one from the cell as it wrapped around it. Cool, huh? Anyway, the most important of the plastids are the chloroplasts, which convert light energy from the sun into sugar and into oxygen, which the plant doesn't need, so it just gets rid of it. All of the green parts of the plant that you see, the leaves, the non-woody stems, unripened oranges are all filled with cells that are filled with chloroplasts, which are making food and oxygen for you. You're very welcome, I'm sure. Another big difference between a plant cell and an animal cell is the large central vacuole. Plant cells can push water into vacuoles, which provides turgor pressure from inside the cell, which reinforces the already stiff cellulose wall and makes the plant rigid, like a crunchy piece of celery or something. Usually when soil dries out or a celery stalk sits in your refrigerator for too long, the cells lose some water, turgor pressure drops, and the plant wilts or gets all floppy. The vacuole is also a kind of storage container for the cell. It can contain water, which plants need to save up just in case, and also other compounds that the cell might need. It can also contain and export stuff that the cell doesn't need anymore, like wastes. Some animal cells also have vacuoles, but they aren't as large, and they don't have this very important job of giving the animal shape. So now let's do this. Let's just go over the basics of plant cell anatomy. 1, they have a cell wall that's made out of cellulose, and so it's really rigid and not messing around. 2, they've got a nucleus in its own little baggie that's separate from all the other organelles. This is basically the headquarters of any eukaryotic cell. It stores the genetic information for a plant and also acts as the cell's activities director, telling it how to grow, when to split, when to jump and how high, that sort of thing. Animal cells have this kind of nucleus too, but prokaryotes don't, which is why they're stuck hanging around in oil wells and stuff. 3, they've got plastids, including chloroplasts, which are awesome green food-making machines. And 4, they have a central vacuole that stores water and other stuff and helps give the cell structural support. And so, stack these cells on top of one another like apartments in an apartment building, and you had a plant. And all of these unique features are what makes it possible for plants to put food on our table and air in our lungs. So next time you see a plant, just go ahead and shake its hand. Thank it for its hard work and its service. Now, we went over that stuff pretty fast, so if you want to go back and listen to any of it, we have a review section over here for stuff that you may not have totally picked up on or just want to watch again. It's not a huge piece of your life to rewatch some stuff, so go ahead and click on these things. If you have questions to do with plant cell anatomy, please leave them for us in the comments, and we will hopefully get to those. You can also hook up with us on Facebook and Twitter, of course, and we will see you on episode 7 of Biology Crash Course.
All right, so if anybody didn't get any of that, totally okay. You know, they kind of threw a lot at you at once. So, it's kind of our broad summary. Now we're going to go over it in depth. Yesterday we talked about the plant cell. However, I left out one organelle yesterday we talked about the animal cell, and I left out one of the organelles, and this is why. Chloroplast and mitochondria. Mitochondria is the one that I left out, and that's because I personally got confused about this because, I didn't have a great science teacher like hopefully all of my students will. Chloroplast and mitochondria are actually both. Chloroplast and mitochondria are present in the plant cell. Animal cells, you just have the mitochondria. What mitochondria do, they're the powerhouse of your cell. Think about them like your energy factory. That's what's going to take that cheeseburger that you had for lunch and turn it into energy that's usable on the cellular level. Okay, because those cheeseburgers are not that useful to your cells. We'll get into that later, but just remember mitochondria is the powerhouse of your cell. All right, what are the functions of the chloroplast and the mitochondria? Chloroplasts are going to capture energy from sunlight, and they're going to convert it into food that's going to contain cellular energy in a process called photosynthesis. This is when I would ask everybody to raise their hands if they have ever heard of photosynthesis. Hopefully majority, they will say yes. And I'll just say, photosynthesis is going to take place inside of our chloroplast, and we'll get more into photosynthesis later. And mitochondria is going to convert chemical energy stored in food into compounds that are more convenient for the cells to use. Okay, so whenever we talk about photosynthesis and plants making food from the chloroplast, is that food usable for the cell? Hopefully everyone would say no. Some people might say yes. I would tell them no. The energy that your chloroplasts make is not usable at the intercellular level. So you have to have mitochondria to break down that food and make it usable for the cell. So chloroplasts make the food. Mitochondria are going to make that food into energy that your cell can use. So mitochondria is going to be in our plant, and our animal. Chloroplast is just going to be in our plant cell. All right. Chloroplasts and mitochondria are both involved in energy conversion processes within the cell. Chloroplasts are the biological equivalents of solar power plants, or those solar panels you see on people's houses. They capture energy from sunlight and convert it into food that contains chemical energy in the process called photosynthesis. Chloroplasts contain chlorophyll, which is why they are green. In fact, chloroplasts are, the reason plants are green is because green is the only wavelength of light, of color, that plants don't absorb. They absorb all the other ones. That's also why some plants have green tops but purple bottoms. The green top, green's going to go through it. Whenever it hits the ground, reflects back up. That purple's going to catch those extra wavelengths. Okay, this is our plant cell. It has our chloroplast and our mitochondria, and our animal cell just has our mitochondria. Nearly all eukaryotic cells, including plants, contain mitochondria. And you get your mitochondria, this is always a fun fact I like to include, you get your mitochondria from your mother's. Mitochondria has its own unique DNA sequence, and it will always be identical to your mother's because the egg cell is so much larger than your sperm cell. So, next time you see your mom, thank her for your mitochondria, that you can take that energy that you can take that food that you ate for lunch and turn it into energy within your cells for your body to use. Mitochondria are the power plants of the cell. They convert chemical energy stored in food into compounds that are more convenient for the cell to use, or ATP, which we'll get into later. There are two membranes, an outer membrane and an inner membrane. I don't know if I blew this up, but there is a little inner membrane that's where the actual energy conversion happens. Enclosed in mitochondria, the inner membrane is folded inside the organelle. Okay. The cellular membrane. What is the function of the cell membrane? The cell membrane regulates what enters and leaves the cell and also protects and supports the cell. Cellular membranes are very important in animal cells because they don't have cell walls like plants. Cell walls, you can kind of think of them as an exoskeleton, kind of. Not really the same, but in this case it'll work. Think of it like a suit of armor. Okay, that's going to make your plant stand up, help it have some support because plants don't have bones. Animal cells need the membranes to regulate what comes in and out, and that's going to kind of give your animal cells a little bit of structure. For example, your skin, wherever you poke it, it's not hard like your bones or like a corn stalk. If you poke a corn stalk, there's not going to be much give to the actual stalk. Sure, the stalk will move, but the actual skin of the plant isn't going to move. Whenever I think of cell membrane, I think about club bouncers. I don't know why. That's just always what I think of. It says, yeah, you can come in. No, you can't come in. you're too big, you're whatever reason, we're full up, we don't need any more, you can't come in. It regulates what goes in and out. And we'll get into the cell membrane a little bit more later, but for now, it regulates what comes in and out. Think about it like your club bouncer. All right, cell wall. Cell walls are super important in plant cells as well as prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells, because they don't have all those organelles that specialize to do certain things. They don't have a cytoskeleton. They don't have stuff like that. So they're going to need a cell wall. Plant cells need it to add extra support to the plant. All right, many cells, including most prokaryotes, also produce a strong supporting layer around the membrane known as the cell wall. The main function of the cell wall is to provide support and protect the cell. Plants, algae, fungi, and many prokaryotes have cells. Animal cells do not have cell walls. So, on your EOC, if they asked you, do animal cells have cell walls, you would of course say no. Cell walls lie outside the cell membrane, and most are porous enough to allow water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and certain other substances to pass through easily. Cell membranes work in the same way. Things like water can pass relatively freely through a cell membrane. And that's just because water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, those are all super important nutrients and chemicals and substances that animals, plant cells, cells in general, life has to have. Without, let me back up. It's beyond the scope of what I'm teaching right now. And back up. Okay. Cell membrane. All right. So, all cells contain a membrane that regulates what enters and leaves the cell, also protects and supports the cell. The composition of nearly all cell membranes is a double-layered sheet called a lipid bilayer, which gives cell membranes a flexible structure and forms a strong barrier between the cell and its surroundings. Okay, so this is always wrong. Okay, this is a misprint from the book. It actually has hydrophobic tails and hydrophilic heads. And the reason it's made like that is because whenever water is going through the cell membrane, you don't want it to get caught in the middle, okay? So it has to be hydrophilic to get it in the cell, hydrophobic to push it out of the cell membrane. So, anyways, I digress. This is called the phospholipid bilayer. That's because it is literally two sheets. Sheets made up of these little bad boys, end to end to end to end. I don't know if y'all can see that on here, but that's all that picture is pretty much. So it's just these little bad boys, these lipids, end to end to end to end. Okay, so that's your top layer. Bottom layer, just flip that around, and that's what you've got, kind of like a sandwich. Okay, so that structure isn't set in stone. It's not like the structure of this board, solid. It is more flexible. Think about it like a float on a pool. It's summertime, so let's think about a float on a pool. It kind of moves with the water. It kind of gives, it kind of ebbs, it kind of sways. Those floats may move around. This lipid bilayer, this cell membrane, is going to do the same thing. These protein channels, these carbohydrate chains, those may not be in the same place every time. They're going to kind of move around. This is a very fluid cell membrane. This is a very fluid layer. Okay, and selectively permeable. Whenever I said that your cell membrane is kind of like your bouncer, that is what I'm talking about whenever I say selectively permeable. It's going to let certain things in and it's not going to let other things in. It's going to be pretty selective about what comes in and what comes out. All right, although many substances can cross biological membranes, some are too large or too strongly charged to cross the lipid bilayer. If a substance is able to cross a membrane, the membrane is said to be permeable to it. So, if we're talking about something that lets water cross it pretty easily, it would be permeable to water. Water can penetrate it. A membrane is impermeable to substances that cannot pass across it. So let's say we're talking about like coffee filter. If you have a good coffee filter, your coffee grounds are not going to get into your coffee. This is where I'd ask the students, write, and hopefully they would say, no, it would not get into your coffee filter, or it would not get into your coffee. So we would say that those coffee grounds cannot pass through the filter. Those coffee grounds, that filter is impermeable to those coffee grounds. So they cannot pass through it. Most biological membranes are selectively permeable, meaning that some substances can cross and others cannot. Selectively permeable membranes are also called semi-permeable membranes. So, moral of the story here, some things can cross, some things can't, and the reason why biologically those cells are made that way is just because they have to be. You need water, you need oxygen, you need carbon dioxide to function. Those things need to be changed across pretty quickly. You don't really have a lot of time to figure out another way to get them across. Or for, your cell membrane to say, okay, come on, nope, you gotta stay. We don't have time for that. Those things have to kind of go pretty quick. Okay, and then this will be our exit ticket. So I would ask my students, to fill out these things. I think there are a few questions on here there are a few questions on here from our animal cells, just to kind of give them an extra review. But they would answer these questions. I'd give them about 5 minutes, and then we would discuss them in class. And that would be it. So, that's all she wrote, folks.